The snow fell like a curtain across the Montana wilderness, turning every landmark into a ghost. Sarah clutched her swollen belly as her car sputtered to a stop beside a weathered ranch gate, but this wasn't the safe house address she'd memorized. Through the blizzard, she could barely make out the silhouette of a man emerging from the shadows, his face half hidden by scars that told their own story of survival. What Sarah didn't know was that Jake Morrison had spent 3 years hiding from his past as an undercover DEA agent whose cover was blown in the most brutal way possible. The ranch was his sanctuary, his escape from the cartel that still wanted him dead. But when he saw the terror in her eyes and the way she protectively cradled her unborn child, something awakened in him that he thought was buried forever. Neither of them realized that Sarah's ex-husband wasn't just abusive. He was the same cartel lieutenant who'd destroyed Jake's life, and he was only 12 hours behind her, following a trail of blood through the snow. What happens when two broken souls discover their pasts are more connected than they ever imagined? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Jake's hand instinctively moved toward the Glock tucked beneath his heavy coat as the woman stumbled from the driver's seat. 3 years of paranoia had taught him that unexpected visitors in a Montana blizzard were rarely lost tourists. But when she looked up at him, her dark eyes wide with a fear that had nothing to do with his scarred appearance, his weapon stayed holstered. "Please," she whispered, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. "I'm looking for the Riverside Ranch. The GPS died miles back and I—" Her words cut off as a contraction seized her, doubling her over against the car door. Jake cursed under his breath. Riverside Ranch was 40 miles east, across roads that would be impassable until the storm passed. He should send her away, tell her to wait it out in her car until morning. Every instinct screamed that involvement meant exposure, and exposure meant death. Instead, he found himself stepping forward as her knees buckled. "Easy," he said, catching her elbow with surprising gentleness for hands that had killed men. "When's the baby due?" 2 weeks, Sarah gasped, then looked up at him with desperate honesty. "Maybe sooner." The smart play was obvious. Radio the sheriff, let social services handle whatever mess this was. Jake had survived 3 years by being smart, by trusting no one, by remembering that his life depended on staying invisible. But as another contraction hit and Sarah's face contorted in pain, his training kicked in. Not his DEA tactical training, but older instincts from before the badge, before the betrayal that left him with a face full of scars and a price on his head. "Come on," he said, already knowing he was making a mistake. "Storm's getting worse." Sarah hesitated, studying his face in the dim light from her car's headlights. The scars were extensive, a jagged line from his left temple to his jaw, another across his forehead that disappeared into his hairline. They should have frightened her. After 2 years of reading micro-expressions and body language to survive Marcus's rages, she'd become an expert at recognizing danger in men. But this man's hands, scarred though they were, remained gentle as he helped her toward the ranch house. And his eyes, gray as the storm clouds overhead, held a wariness she recognized, the look of someone who understood what it meant to run. "I'm Sarah," she said as they reached the covered porch. "Jake." He pushed open the heavy wooden door and warmth rushed out to meet them. "You running from someone?" The question was direct, without judgment, and Sarah realized he already knew the answer. "Aren't we all running from some—" Jake almost smiled at that. Almost. Instead, he guided her into the living room where a fire crackled in a stone fireplace. The interior was sparse but clean, functional furniture, no personal photographs, nothing that spoke of a life before this place. Sarah recognized the signs of someone who'd learned to travel light. "Phone's out," Jake said, though he hadn't checked it. The phone had worked fine an hour ago, but admitting that meant admitting he had no intention of calling anyone. Storm probably took down the lines. Sarah nodded, sinking gratefully into a worn leather chair near the fire. She should be afraid. She was alone with a stranger in the middle of nowhere, and Marcus had taught her to fear situations exactly like this one. But the warmth of the fire and the exhaustion of 6 days on the run were stronger than her caution. "The baby's not his," she said suddenly, surprising herself. Jake paused in the act of adding wood to the fire. "Whose?" "Someone who mattered," Sarah said softly, her hand moving protectively over her belly. "Someone who died before he knew." Outside, the storm raged harder, as if the Montana wilderness itself was sealing them in together. The storm had grown worse during the night, and Maya woke to find herself buried under a mountain of quilts that smelled faintly of lavender and wood smoke. For a moment she couldn't remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back. The blizzard, the car sliding off the road, the man with the scarred face who'd pulled her from the wreckage. She sat up carefully, her hand instinctively moving to her belly. The baby kicked, a reassuring flutter that made her exhale with relief. Through the frosted window she could see nothing but white, snow still falling in thick curtains that erased the world beyond the glass. The bedroom was sparse but clean, with hand-hewn furniture that looked decades old. A fire crackled in a small stone fireplace, and someone had left a stack of women's clothes on the chair beside the bed. Maya picked up a soft flannel shirt, wondering who it had belonged to. The man, Jake, he'd said his name was, didn't seem like someone who entertained many guests. She dressed slowly, her body still aching from the accident. In the hallway, she followed the scent of coffee and bacon to a kitchen that looked like it belonged in another century. Cast-iron pans hung from hooks, and the stove was an ancient gas model that probably predated her birth. Jake stood at the counter with his back to her, and in the morning light she could see the full extent of the scarring that ran down the left side of his neck, disappearing beneath his collar. His dark hair was still damp, as if he'd already been outside in the storm. "You shouldn't be up," he said without turning around. "Doctor's coming as soon as the road's clear." "I feel fine." It wasn't entirely true. Her ribs ached and her head still throbbed, but she'd endured worse. "Thank you for the clothes." He turned then, and she saw his face clearly for the first time. The scarring extended up to his left temple, pulling slightly at the corner of his eye, but it was his expression that made her step back, guarded, almost hostile. The gentleness from the night before had vanished. "They were my wife's," he said curtly, pouring coffee into 2 mugs. "She won't be needing them." The way he said it made Maya's chest tighten. "I'm sorry. Don't be." He slid 1 mug across the scarred wooden table. "Eat something. Baby needs it." She sat carefully, accepting the plate of eggs and bacon he placed in front of her. They ate in silence, the only sound the howling wind outside. Maya kept glancing at him, trying to reconcile the man who'd carried her to safety with this cold stranger across from her. "The storm should pass by tomorrow," Jake said finally. "Then you can be on your way." Maya's fork paused halfway to her mouth. She had nowhere to go, no plan beyond putting distance between herself and Marcus. The thought of leaving this warm kitchen, of facing the world outside again, made her throat close with panic. "Of course," she managed. "I don't want to impose." Something flickered across his face, surprise maybe, or disappointment, but it was gone so quickly she might have imagined it. After breakfast, Jake disappeared outside to tend to his animals, leaving Maya alone in the house. She explored carefully, noting the dust covers on furniture in what must have been a living room. The family photos turned face down on the mantel. The house felt frozen in time, as if Jake had simply stopped living in most of it. She found herself drawn to the kitchen window, watching his distant figure moving between the barn and what looked like a chicken coop. Even in the blizzard, he moved with purpose, unaffected by the brutal cold that would have sent her running for shelter. The isolation here was complete. No neighbors visible through the storm, no power lines or cell towers. It was exactly what she'd been looking for when she'd fled Denver 3 days ago, though she'd imagined ending up in some anonymous motel, not in the home of a man who seemed as damaged as she was. Maya's hand moved to her belly again, feeling the baby's movements. 6 months along now, and still no word from Marcus's people. She'd started to hope that maybe, just maybe, she'd actually escaped. but hope was dangerous. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. When Jake came back inside, stamping snow from his boots, she was washing their breakfast dishes. "You don't need to do that," he said, but his voice had lost some of its edge. "I want to help. I'm not used to sitting idle." He studied her for a long moment, taking in her careful movements, the way she kept glancing toward the windows. "What are you running from?" The question hung between them, sharp and unexpected. Maya's hands stilled in the soapy water. "What makes you think I'm running?" "Because I know what it looks like." His scarred face was unreadable. "Question is whether you're running from something or to something." Maya met his eyes. Seeing something there she recognized, the hollow look of someone who understood exactly how dark the world could be. "From," she whispered. The storm had passed by morning, leaving behind a world transformed into crystalline silence. Sarah woke to unfamiliar sounds, the distant lowing of cattle, the creak of old wood settling, the whisper of wind through eaves. For a moment, panic seized her as she struggled to remember where she was. Then it all came flooding back, the accident, the stranger who'd saved her, this rambling farmhouse that had become her refuge. She pressed her hand to her belly, feeling the familiar flutter of movement that reassured her everything was still okay. The baby was active this morning, stretching against the confines of her womb as if sensing the change in their circumstances. Voices drifted up from somewhere below, Marcus speaking in low tones to someone else. Sarah's heart rate spiked until she recognized the second voice as distinctly female and elderly. She forced herself to breathe slowly. Not everyone was a threat. Not everyone meant her harm. The door opened after a soft knock, and Marcus entered carrying a steaming mug and a plate of food. In the morning light streaming through the curtained window, she could see him more clearly. The scars on the left side of his face were extensive, jagged lines that spoke of violence rather than accident. His left hand, she noticed, bore similar marks. Despite the damage, there was something undeniably handsome about his strong jaw and deep-set eyes, something that made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "How are you feeling?" he asked, setting the breakfast on the nightstand. "Better. Stronger." She struggled to sit up, and he moved instinctively to help her before stopping himself, his hand hovering uncertainly in the air between them. "It's okay," she said softly. "I'm not afraid of you." Something flickered in his expression, surprise, maybe even relief. He helped her adjust the pillows behind her back, his touch gentle but brief. Mrs. Chen from down the road came by to check on the animals. "She's a retired nurse. I thought maybe she could take a look at you, make sure everything's all right with—" He gestured vaguely toward her belly. Sarah's defenses immediately snapped back into place. "I can't see a nurse. I can't see anyone. She's trustworthy. She's been living here longer than anyone can remember. Keeps to herself mostly." "You don't understand." Sarah's voice cracked with desperation. "I can't be found. If he finds me—" She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the fear that had been driving her for weeks. Marcus sat carefully on the edge of the bed, maintaining distance but close enough that she could see the concern in his eyes. "Who are you running from, Sarah?" The kindness in his voice nearly broke her resolve. When was the last time someone had spoken to her with such gentleness? When was the last time someone had cared enough to ask? "My ex-boyfriend, the baby's father." The words felt like broken glass in her throat. "He's dangerous, violent. When I told him I was leaving, he said he'd kill me before he'd let me take his child away from him." Marcus's jaw tightened, and she saw his scarred hand clench into a fist before he deliberately relaxed it. "Did he do this to you?" He touched his own face, indicating the fading bruises she still carried. She nodded, unable to speak. "What's his name?" "Why?" "Because men who hurt pregnant women deserve to have their names known." The fierce protectiveness in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. "David Reeves. He has connections, money, influence. He always finds a way to get what he wants. Not this time." The certainty in Marcus's voice was absolute. "You're safe here. I give you my word. You don't know him. You don't know what he's capable of. Maybe not. But he doesn't know me either. There was something dark and dangerous in Marcus's tone, something that suggested he understood violence intimately. Mrs. Chen won't say anything. She doesn't trust outsiders any more than you do. Let her check you over. Make sure you and the baby are healthy. After that, we'll figure out next steps. Sarah studied his face, searching for deception and finding none. This man was offering her something she'd almost forgotten existed. Genuine protection without expectation of payment. It terrified her almost as much as it filled her with hope. Why are you helping me? You don't even know me. Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his fingers unconsciously tracing one of the scars on his hand. Let's just say I know what it's like to run from something, to need a place to disappear. Before Sarah could ask what he meant, footsteps sounded on the stairs. Marcus rose quickly. That'll be Mrs. Chen. I'll give you two some privacy. He paused at the door, looking back at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Sarah, whatever happens, whatever comes next, you're not alone anymore. The blizzard had passed, leaving behind a world transformed in crystalline white. Maya stood at the kitchen window, watching Ben work his way through the snow drifts toward the barn, his breath creating small clouds in the frigid air. 3 days had passed since she'd collapsed on his doorstep, and despite his gruff exterior, he'd shown her nothing but unexpected kindness. She pressed her hand to her rounded belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. 6 months along now, and every day brought her closer to a future she couldn't quite envision. The baby kicked, as if responding to her touch, and she smiled despite the uncertainty gnawing at her chest. Easy there, little one, she whispered. We're safe here, for now. The sound of Ben's boots on the porch made her step back from the window. He entered through the mudroom, stamping snow from his feet and pulling off his heavy coat. Ice crystals clung to his dark hair, and his cheeks were flushed from the cold. Roads are still impassable, he said without preamble, hanging his coat on a wooden peg. Could be another few days before the county gets out here with the plows. Maya nodded, trying to ignore the way relief flooded through her. She wasn't ready to leave this sanctuary. Wasn't ready to face the world beyond these walls where danger might be waiting around every corner. I made coffee, she offered, gesturing toward the pot on the stove. And breakfast if you're hungry. Ben paused in the doorway, his grey eyes studying her with an intensity that made her pulse quicken. Over the past 3 days, she'd caught glimpses of the man beneath the hardened exterior, moments of unexpected gentleness, flashes of humor, and something deeper that he kept carefully guarded. You don't need to wait on me, he said, but there was no harshness in his voice. I want to earn my keep. Maya moved to pour him a cup of coffee, grateful for something to do with her hands. Besides, I like having something to do. Helps keep my mind occupied. Ben accepted the mug, their fingers brushing briefly. The contact sent an unexpected jolt through her, and from the way his jaw tightened, she suspected he felt it too. What are you running from? The question came quietly, without judgment, but it still made her freeze. She'd known this moment would come. Ben wasn't the type of man to let sleeping dogs lie, especially when those dogs had taken up residence in his home. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warmth radiating from the wood stove. My ex-husband. The words tasted bitter on her tongue. He's not a good man, Ben. When I told him I was leaving, he made it clear that he'd never let me go, that he'd find me wherever I went. Ben's expression darkened, and she saw his hands clench around the coffee mug. Did he hurt you? The gentle concern in his voice nearly undid her. She'd grown so accustomed to fear, to constantly looking over her shoulder, that simple human compassion felt overwhelming. Not physically, not yet. She touched her belly protectively, but he threatened to. Said if I tried to take his child. She couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the terrible things Marcus had promised to do. Ben set down his mug and moved closer, his presence solid and reassuring. You're safe here, Maya. I give you my word on that. You don't understand what kind of man he is. Her voice cracked despite her efforts to stay strong. He has money, connections. He'll never stop looking for me. Then he'll have to go through me first. The quiet certainty in Ben's voice made her look up, meeting his steady gaze. There was something fierce and protective in his expression, something that spoke of a man who'd faced darkness before and emerged scarred but unbroken. "Why?" she whispered. "Why would you risk yourself for a stranger?" Ben was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as if he was struggling with something. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. "Because I know what it's like to feel helpless. To watch someone you care about suffer and not be able to stop it." His hand unconsciously moved to the scar on his neck, fingers tracing the raised skin. "I couldn't save her, but maybe I can save you." Maya's heart clenched at the raw anguish in his voice. Whatever had happened to him, whatever had carved those scars into his skin and soul, it had left him with wounds that went far deeper than what showed on the surface. "Ben." She reached out tentatively, her fingertips barely grazing his scarred hand. "I'm sorry." He stiffened at the contact but didn't pull away. "Don't be. Just let me help you, please." Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows and sending snow swirling across the yard. Maya shivered, thinking of Marcus and his threats, of the life she'd fled and the uncertain future ahead. But here, in this warm kitchen, with this damaged, caring man, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years: hope. The morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Elena stirred awake on the worn couch, momentarily disoriented by the unfamiliar surroundings. The events of the previous night came flooding back: the storm, her car sliding off the road, and the mysterious man who'd offered her shelter. She placed a protective hand over her rounded belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements as reassurance that they were both safe. The cabin was quiet, except for the soft crackling of dying embers in the fireplace. A thick wool blanket had been draped over her sometime during the night, though she didn't remember Samuel covering her. The gesture stirred something unexpected in her chest, a warmth she hadn't felt in months. Voices drifted from outside, muffled by the walls but growing clearer as someone approached the porch. Elena's blood turned to ice as she recognized the tone, even if she couldn't make out the words. Demanding, aggressive, familiar. Looking for a woman. A man's voice carried through the door. Pregnant, driving a blue Honda. Car was found abandoned about 2 miles down the road. Elena's heart hammered against her ribs. Marcus had found her, somehow, despite all her careful planning, despite choosing the most remote route possible, he'd tracked her down. She pressed herself deeper into the couch cushions, as if she could disappear entirely. Samuel's voice responded, calm and measured. "Haven't seen anyone like that. Storm was pretty bad last night. Could have been abandoned for days. Mind if I take a look around?" The question wasn't really a question. Elena had heard that tone before, usually right before Marcus pushed past whatever boundary she'd tried to establish. "Actually, I do mind." Samuel's voice had shifted, taking on an edge that made Elena shiver. "This is private property, and you don't have a warrant." A long pause stretched between the men. Elena held her breath, afraid that even the sound of her breathing might give her away. Through the window, she could see shadows moving, at least 2 figures, maybe 3. "The woman I'm looking for is my fiancée," Marcus said, his voice dripping with false concern. "She's not well. Pregnancy hormones, you understand. She gets confused, makes poor decisions. I'm just trying to bring her home where she belongs." The lies rolled off his tongue so smoothly that Elena almost believed them herself for a moment. She'd heard variations of this speech before, delivered to her friends, her co-workers, anyone who might question the bruises or her increasing isolation. "Like I said," Samuel replied, "haven't seen her. Now I've got work to do." Footsteps moved across the porch, but they weren't retreating. Instead, they seemed to be circling, testing. Elena caught a glimpse of movement near the window and quickly averted her gaze, staring at the floor as if eye contact through glass could somehow reveal her presence. "You know," Marcus continued, his voice taking on the silky undertone that always preceded his worst moments, "it's interesting how helpful some people can be when they understand the situation better." The threat hung in the air like smoke. Elena knew Samuel barely knew her, had no reason to risk himself for a stranger. She waited for the inevitable, for him to cave under pressure, to reveal her location, to hand her over to preserve his own safety. Instead, she heard the distinct sound of a shotgun being pumped. "Think, might be some confusion here," Samuel said, his voice deadly quiet. "See, you're on my land making threats, when I've already told you I can't help you. Now, I'm not the most social person, but even I know that's poor manners." Elena's breath caught. No one had ever stood up to Marcus before. Her ex-husband commanded respect through fear, intimidation, and his family's considerable influence in Chicago. People didn't challenge him, they looked the other way or actively assisted him. "I don't think you understand who you're dealing with," Marcus snarled, dropping his pretense of civility. "I understand perfectly." Samuel's boots moved across the porch planks. "I understand you're about 30 seconds away from finding out what rock salt feels like at close range. I understand that my nearest neighbor is 5 miles away, which means no one's going to hear much of anything that happens here. And I understand that you're going to get off my property right now, or we're going to have ourselves a real conversation." The silence stretched so long that Elena wondered if Marcus had simply vanished. Then she heard car doors slamming and an engine roaring to life. But even as the sound of vehicles retreated down the mountain road, she knew this wasn't over. Marcus didn't give up. He never gave up. Samuel's boots approached the front door, pausing just outside. When he finally entered, his face was grim, the shotgun still cradled in his arms. "They're gone," he said simply, though his eyes remained fixed on the windows. "For now." Elena met his gaze, seeing something there she hadn't expected, a recognition of darkness that matched her own. "Thank you," she whispered. He nodded once, setting the weapon aside. "We need to talk." The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the morning sun. Elena stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake clear a path to the barn with methodical strokes of his shovel. Each movement was precise, economical, like everything else about him. She'd been watching him for the past 20 minutes, coffee growing cold in her hands, studying the way he favored his left side and how he paused every few minutes to scan the horizon. Always watching, always alert, just like her. The baby stirred restlessly, and Elena placed her free hand on her belly, whispering soft reassurances. 7 months along now, and her daughter, she was certain it was a daughter, seemed to sense her mother's constant state of tension. Dr. Martinez had warned her about stress affecting the pregnancy, but how could she explain that relaxation was a luxury she couldn't afford? "You're up early." Jake's voice startled her, though she managed not to spill her coffee. She hadn't heard him come in, which should have terrified her. Instead, she felt something dangerously close to comfort. "Couldn't sleep," she said, not turning from the window. "Thank you for letting me stay another night. I know you didn't plan on—" "Roads are still impassable." His voice was closer now, and she could smell the cold air clinging to his clothes, mixed with something else, wood smoke and leather, and something uniquely him. "Sheriff called this morning. Main highway won't be cleared until tomorrow at the earliest." Elena nodded, trying to ignore the relief that flooded through her. Another day of safety. Another day before she had to face the world beyond this ranch. "Elena." Jake's voice was softer now, careful. "Last night when you were sleeping you said a name, Marcus." Her coffee cup shattered against the floor. Jake was beside her instantly, his hands on her shoulders, steadying her as she swayed. "Easy, just breathe." But she couldn't breathe. Marcus. She'd said his name aloud, which meant she'd been dreaming about him again. The dreams where he found her, where his hands were around her throat, where he whispered all the ways he would hurt her for running. "I'm sorry," she gasped, looking down at the broken ceramic and spreading puddle of coffee. I'm so sorry, I'll clean it up. Forget the cup. Jake's hands were still on her shoulders, anchoring her. Talk to me. She wanted to. God, how she wanted to tell someone the truth after months of lies and half-truths and carefully constructed stories. But the words stuck in her throat like broken glass. He's the father, she finally whispered. Marcus is the baby's father. Jake's hands tightened almost imperceptibly on her shoulders. And he wants us back. Both of us. Her voice was barely audible. He thinks we belong to him. Jake was quiet for a long moment, his grey eyes searching her face. Elena found herself memorizing the details, the small scar through his left eyebrow, the way his jaw tightened when he was thinking, the unexpected gentleness in his weathered hands. Does he know where you are? No. The word came out too quickly, too desperate. At least, I don't think so. I've been careful. New name, cash only, no credit cards or phones he could trace. But Marcus, she swallowed hard. He has resources, connections, and he doesn't give up. Jake released her shoulders and knelt to gather the larger pieces of the broken cup. His movements were deliberate, giving her space to breathe, to decide how much truth she was willing to share. I was a prosecutor, she found herself saying. In Chicago, I specialized in domestic violence cases, which is ironic, considering. A bitter laugh escaped her. I thought I was so smart, so strong. I told women every day how to recognize the warning signs, how to leave safely. But when it was happening to me, it's different when you're in it. She looked down at him, surprised by the understanding in his voice. Yes. The charm comes first, then the isolation, then the control, so gradual you don't notice until you're trapped. She touched her belly protectively. When I found out I was pregnant, I knew I had to leave. He'd already hurt me, but a baby, I couldn't let him hurt my baby. Jake stood slowly, the broken pieces cupped in his palms. How long have you been running? 4 months. 4 months of looking over her shoulder, of jumping at shadows, of sleeping with a knife under her pillow. I thought I was far enough away, but yesterday, when I saw those headlights, they weren't his, Jake said with quiet certainty. How can you be sure? Something shifted in his expression, a hardness settling over his features like armor. Because if they were, we wouldn't be having this conversation. The words sent a chill down Elena's spine, not fear of Jake, but recognition. Whatever secrets he was hiding, whatever darkness lived behind those grey eyes, it was the kind that could match Marcus's violence with something far more dangerous. Protection born of experience with monsters. The kitchen felt smaller, with Marcus standing so close, his eyes searching her face, as if trying to decode every expression. Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs, the weight of his question hanging between them like a blade. The baby's father, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. His name is Derek Vaughan. Marcus's jaw tightened, almost imperceptibly. She caught the flicker of something, recognition, in his eyes before he carefully schooled his features. He's not just violent, she continued, wrapping her arms around herself. He's connected, has people everywhere, the kind of man who doesn't let go of what he considers his property. Property. The word came out flat, dangerous. That's all I ever was to him, a possession, something to control, to hurt when he felt like it. Sarah moved to the window, staring out at the endless white expanse. When I found out I was pregnant, I thought maybe it would change him. Maybe he'd want to be better. The silence stretched until Marcus spoke, his voice rough, but it made him worse. He said the baby would make me even more his, that I'd never be able to leave. She touched her belly instinctively. That's when I knew I had to run, or we'd both be trapped forever. Marcus stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. How did you get away? I had help. Someone on the inside who knew what Derek was capable of. Sarah's throat constricted, but Derek found out. That person, they didn't make it. The weight of that loss settled over her again, the guilt that followed her like a shadow. Someone had died so she could escape, and now Derek was hunting her with renewed fury. Sarah. Marcus's hand touched her shoulder, gentle but grounding. You're not responsible for what he did. She turned to face him, tears threatening. Aren't I? If I hadn't… No. His voice was firm, final. The blood on his hands isn't yours to carry. Something in his tone made her study his face more carefully. There were depths to Marcus's darkness she was only beginning to glimpse, layers of pain and secrets that ran as deep as her own. You sound like you know something about carrying blood that isn't yours, she said softly. Marcus went very still. For a moment, she thought he might open up, might trust her with whatever haunted him. Instead, he stepped back, the walls slamming back into place. We should focus on keeping you safe. The dismissal stung, but Sarah pushed down her disappointment. They were both guarded, both carrying wounds that made trust a luxury neither could afford. Yet something was growing between them. Fragile and uncertain but real. The radio crackled to life from the living room, making them both freeze. Marcus moved quickly, Sarah following close behind. Searching for a woman in connection with the death of Detective Raymond Walsh. Sarah Chen is considered armed and dangerous. Sarah's blood turned to ice. Derek had found a way to turn her into the criminal, painting her as the threat while he played the grieving victim. Of course he had connections in the police force. He had connections everywhere. Marcus switched off the radio, his expression grim. Walsh. That was the person who helped you? She nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. Ray had been a good man, a detective who'd seen through Derek's charm to the monster beneath. Now he was dead, and Derek was using his murder to ensure every law enforcement officer in the state would be hunting her. How far does his reach go? Marcus asked. I don't know. Further than I thought, apparently. Sarah sank onto the couch, the full scope of her situation crashing over her. He's made me the enemy now. Even if I could prove what he did, who would believe me? A fugitive murder suspect against a respected businessman? Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he spoke, his voice carried a strange note of resignation. Sometimes the only way out is through. What do you mean? He looked at her then, and she saw something shift in his expression. A decision being made, a line being crossed. Derek Vaughan isn't the only one with connections, Marcus said slowly. And he's not the only one willing to get his hands dirty. A chill ran down Sarah's spine that had nothing to do with the cold. Marcus, what are you saying? But before he could answer, Rex began barking frantically at the front door. They both froze, listening. Through the howling wind, Sarah could swear she heard the distant rumble of an engine. Marcus moved to the window, peering through the curtain. His face went pale. Get upstairs, he said quietly. Now, what is it? 2 trucks, coming up the drive. His eyes met hers, deadly serious. Sarah, go. Whatever you hear, don't come down. The engines grew louder, closer, and Sarah knew with cold certainty that her time was up. The snowfall had stopped sometime during the night, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the morning sun. Maya stood at the kitchen window, watching Jake clear a path to the barn with methodical precision. Each movement seemed calculated, purposeful, so different from the chaotic energy that had defined her life with Derek. She pressed her hand to her growing belly, feeling the baby's gentle movements. 22 weeks now, and the little one seemed to respond to the peace of this place. The constant anxiety that had plagued her pregnancy was slowly giving way to something she barely remembered. Hope. You're up early. Jake's voice came from behind her as he stamped snow from his boots at the back door. Couldn't sleep much. She turned to face him, noting the way his breath still misted in the cold air clinging to his clothes. The quiet here it's different. Good different. He nodded, understanding flickering in his dark eyes. Coffee's still warm if you want some. Thanks. She poured herself a cup, inhaling the rich aroma. It was one of the few things that didn't trigger nausea anymore. Jake, I need to tell you something. The careful way she spoke made him pause in removing his heavy coat. What is it? I called my sister yesterday. Left a message. Maya's fingers tightened around the mug. I didn't tell her where I was, just that I was safe. But Derek, he might try to trace the call somehow. Jake hung his coat deliberately, his expression unreadable. What kind of resources does he have? The question was asked so calmly that it sent a chill through her. This wasn't the reaction of someone naive about danger. He's a detective. Chicago PD. He has connections, ways of finding information that most people don't. A cop. Jake's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. That explains a lot. You're not surprised. Men who abuse their power come in all forms. He moved to the coffee pot, pouring himself a fresh cup. The uniform just makes it easier for them to get away with it. Maya studied his profile, noting the tension in his shoulders. You sound like you speak from experience. For a long moment, the only sound was the gentle bubbling of the coffee pot. When Jake finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. My father was military, decorated officer, respected in the community. At home, he trailed off, taking a sip of coffee. Let's just say I learned early that a man's public face doesn't always match what he does behind closed doors. The admission hung between them, creating an invisible bridge of understanding. Maya felt something shift in her chest, not just sympathy, but recognition. They were both survivors, both carrying scars that the world couldn't see. I'm sorry, she said softly. Don't be. He met her eyes. It taught me something important. It taught me that sometimes running is the smartest thing you can do, and sometimes standing your ground is the only option left. Before Maya could respond, Jake's dog began barking outside, sharp, urgent barks that made both of them freeze. Jake set down his coffee and moved to the window, his entire demeanor shifting to high alert. What is it? Maya whispered, fear instantly flooding her system. Truck coming up the drive. Jake's voice was grim, dark sedan behind it. Maya's blood turned to ice. Derek drives a dark sedan. Get upstairs, now. Jake was already moving toward what she now realized was a gun cabinet, not a regular storage closet. Back bedroom, the one with the window facing the woods. If things go bad, there's a rope ladder under the bed. Jake, no, I won't let you. He turned to face her, and she saw something in his eyes that made her breath catch. It wasn't fear. It was the look of a man who had made a decision and wouldn't be swayed from it. I know what I'm doing, trust me. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the morning air. Maya's hands shook as she pressed them to her belly. What if it's not him? What if it's just... Then no harm done. Jake pulled a rifle from the cabinet with practiced ease. But if it is him, I need to know you're safe. The barking grew more frantic. Footsteps crunched on snow, multiple sets, moving toward the house with purpose. Maya felt the baby kick, as if sensing her terror. Go, Jake urged, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. Please. Maya nodded, moving toward the stairs on unsteady legs. At the bottom step, she turned back. Jake stood by the front window, rifle held low but ready, his scarred face set in hard lines. In that moment she realized something that should have terrified her, but instead filled her with fierce protectiveness. She was falling in love with this damaged, dangerous man who was willing to stand between her and the storm. A heavy knock echoed through the house, followed by a voice that made Maya's blood freeze. Jake Morrison? Chicago PD. We'd like to ask you a few questions. The storm had passed, leaving behind a crystalline world that sparkled under the morning sun. Maya stood at the kitchen window, watching steam rise from her coffee mug as she observed the pristine landscape. 3 weeks had transformed everything, not just the weather, but something deeper between her and Jake that she was still afraid to name. Behind her, she heard his boots on the wooden floor, the familiar uneven gait that no longer made her flinch. He'd been up before dawn checking on the cattle, and snow dusted his dark hair like premature grey. Road still impassable, he said, hanging his coat on the hook by the door. Might be another few days before the county gets the plough out this far. Maya nodded, trying to ignore the relief that flooded through her. She shouldn't want to stay trapped here. She had plans, a new life waiting somewhere far from here, far from Marcus. But every morning she woke in the small guest room, she felt more rooted to this place, more reluctant to imagine leaving. "I've been thinking," Jake continued, moving to pour himself coffee. His movements were careful, deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed what he was about to say. "When the road's clear, you don't have to go. Not if you don't want to." The words hung between them like morning mist. Maya's hand instinctively moved to her belly, where the baby had been increasingly active, as if responding to the emotional undercurrents around them. "Jake, I know what you're going to say." He turned to face her, and she saw something vulnerable in his expression that made her chest tighten. "I know you have your reasons for running, and I'm not asking you to tell me everything, but this place, it could be safe for you, for the baby." She wanted to tell him it wasn't that simple, wanted to explain that Marcus wasn't the kind of man who simply gave up, that his connections ran deep and his patience was infinite when it came to things he considered his property. But looking at Jake now, seeing the careful hope in his eyes, the words stuck in her throat. "What if I bring danger here?" she asked instead. "What if staying puts you at risk?" Something flickered across his face, an emotion she couldn't quite read. "I can handle danger." There was weight to his words, a certainty that spoke of experience. She thought of the scars that marked his body, the way he sometimes woke from nightmares he never discussed, the careful way he monitored the property line as if expecting threats from beyond the horizon. Before she could respond, a sharp crack echoed from outside. They both froze, Jake's hand instinctively moving toward the rifle mounted near the door. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs as memories of Marcus's unpredictable violence crashed over her. "Probably just ice falling from the roof," Jake said. But he was already moving toward the window, scanning the yard with practiced efficiency. Maya joined him, pressing close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body. The contact should have made her nervous. Physical proximity to men had become something to endure rather than seek. But with Jake, it felt natural, safe in a way she'd almost forgotten was possible. "There," he said softly, pointing toward the barn. A large branch, heavy with ice, had broken free from the old oak and crashed onto the roof. Relief loosened the knots in Maya's shoulders, but Jake remained tense beside her. "You're always watching," she observed, "always ready for something." He was quiet for a long moment, his reflection ghost-like in the window glass. "I wasn't always a farmer," he said finally. "Before I came here, I did things, saw things that don't let go easily." She understood. The past had claws that dug deep, leaving marks that never fully healed. "Is that why you live out here? So far from everything?" "Partly." He turned to look at her directly. "But also because I was waiting." "For what?" "I didn't know then." His hand lifted, hovering near her cheek as if he wanted to touch her, but wasn't sure he had the right. Maybe for someone who understood that sometimes running away is the only way to survive. The baby chose that moment to kick, a sharp movement that made Maya gasp and press her hand to her side. Jake's eyes immediately dropped to her belly, concern replacing everything else. "Is everything okay?" She caught his hand, surprising them both by pressing it against her stomach where the baby was moving. Jake went very still, his scarred fingers spread wide over the curve of her pregnancy. "He's active today," she whispered, watching wonder transform Jake's features as the baby kicked against his palm. They stood like that as the morning light grew stronger, connected by the small life growing between them and the unspoken promise of something neither had dared hope for. Outside, the world remained frozen and pristine, but inside the farmhouse kitchen, something new and fragile was taking root. The morning light filtered through the frost-covered windows as Maya carefully folded the last of her laundered clothes into a neat pile. Her movements were deliberate, almost ritualistic, as if the simple act could somehow organize the chaos in her mind. The baby kicked gently, and she pressed her hand to her belly, whispering soft reassurances. Footsteps on the porch made her freeze, too light to be Jake's boots, too quick to be the measured pace she'd grown accustomed to. Her pulse quickened as she moved toward the window, staying close to the wall. A woman stood on the porch, middle-aged with graying hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. She wore a sheriff's department jacket and carried herself with the quiet authority Maya had learned to fear. The woman knocked again, patient but persistent. "Jake Brennan? This is Deputy Collins. I'd like a word." Maya's breath caught. Through the thin walls, she could hear Jake's voice from the barn, calling to the horses. He hadn't heard the knock. The deputy waited, then tried the door handle. Locked. She stepped back, surveying the property with trained eyes. Moving as quietly as possible, Maya slipped into the back bedroom. Her bag was already packed. She'd never fully unpacked it, some survival instinct keeping her ready to run. But as she reached for it, her chest tightened with something she hadn't expected: reluctance. The deputy's radio crackled. "Collins here. Any luck with the welfare check?" "Property owners not answering. Vehicles here, though. I'm going to wait a few more minutes. Welfare check." Maya's hands trembled as she processed the words. Someone had called about her. But who, and what had they said? The barn door creaked open, and she heard Jake's voice, surprised but cordial. "Morning, Deputy. Something I can help you with?" "Mr. Brennan, sorry to bother you so early. We received a call about a possible domestic situation. Someone reported seeing a pregnant woman who appeared distressed near your property." Maya closed her eyes. It could have been anyone. The clerk at the gas station, someone who'd seen her walking along the road that first night. In a small town, strangers were noticed, remembered, talked about. Domestic situation? Jake's voice carried just the right note of confusion. "I live alone out here. Mind if I take a look around? Just standard procedure." There was a pause that stretched too long. Maya could picture Jake weighing his options, calculating risks. Finally, of course, though there's not much to see. Footsteps approached the house. Maya grabbed her bag and moved toward the back door, but stopped when she heard Jake's voice again, closer now. "Deputy, before we go in, I should mention I've been having some issues with drifters lately. Found evidence someone's been in the barn a few times. Nothing taken, but it's got me on edge. You file a report. Didn't seem worth the trouble. Figured it was just folks looking for shelter from the cold." Maya understood immediately. He was giving her an out, a story that would explain any evidence of her presence. But it would also mean leaving, disappearing back into the winter landscape with nowhere to go. The front door opened. Maya heard their voices in the main room, the deputy's questions methodical and professional. Jake's answers were calm, helpful, giving away nothing. But she could hear the strain underneath, the careful control. "Nice place you have here," the deputy said. "Must get lonely, though." "I prefer the quiet." The caller mentioned seeing a woman with dark hair, about 6 months pregnant. Said she looked scared. "You sure you haven't seen anyone matching that description?" Another pause. Maya pressed herself against the back door, bag in hand. Through the window she could see the tree line about 50 yards away. If she ran now she might make it, but the snow would show her tracks, and a pregnant woman couldn't outrun a radio. "No," Jake said finally. "Can't say I have. Well, if you do see anyone, give us a call. Woman in that condition, in this weather, we just want to make sure she's safe." "Of course." The deputy's radio crackled again. "Collins, we've got a situation on Highway 6. Possible fatality. Copy that. On my way." Maya heard hurried goodbyes, the deputy's quick steps retreating toward her vehicle. An engine started, tires crunched on gravel, and then silence. She stayed frozen against the door until Jake's voice came, soft and careful. "She's gone." Maya emerged from the bedroom, legs shaky with relief and residual fear. Jake stood by the front window, watching the road. "Thank you," she whispered. He turned to face her, and she saw something new in his expression, a hardening, a resignation that chilled her. "We need to talk," he said quietly. "Both of us. No more secrets, Maya, because next time we might not be so lucky." The baby kicked again, harder this time, as if sensing the tension. Maya nodded, knowing he was right, knowing that everything was about to change. The first gunshot shattered the morning silence like breaking glass. Sarah jerked awake from the couch, her heart hammering against her ribs. Through the frost-covered window, she could see Jake crouched behind his truck, rifle raised toward the tree line. Another shot cracked through the air, splintering bark from the oak near the barn. "Stay down!" Jake shouted without turning around. "And get away from the windows!" Sarah rolled off the couch, her pregnant belly making the movement clumsy, and crawled toward the kitchen. Her phone sat on the counter, but when she reached for it, the screen showed no signal. Of course, Marcus would have thought of that. He'd probably brought a jammer. A third shot punched through the front window, sending glass cascading across the living room floor. Sarah pressed herself against the kitchen cabinets, trying to make sense of what was happening. How had Marcus found her so quickly? She'd been so careful, had covered her tracks so well, unless he'd been watching longer than she realized. Through the kitchen window she caught a glimpse of movement in the woods, a flash of dark clothing between the pine trees. Her blood turned to ice. Marcus had brought help. This wasn't just him coming to drag her home, this was something else entirely. Jake fired twice in quick succession, then sprinted from his truck to the barn, using it as cover. Sarah watched him move with a fluid precision that spoke of experience, and she remembered what he'd told her about the war, about the things he'd done. Her phone buzzed against the counter. Somehow a text had gotten through. With shaking hands, she grabbed it and read the message from an unknown number. "Come out now, Sarah. Just you. Or your boyfriend dies slow." The words made her stomach lurch, but it was the photo attached that made her cry out. Marcus had taken it through a scope, Jake in perfect crosshairs, unaware that death was aimed directly at his chest. "Jake!" she screamed. "He's got you in his sights." Jake dove sideways just as a bullet sparked off the barn's metal siding, where his head had been a second before. He rolled behind a water trough, breathing hard. "How many?" he called out. Sarah peered carefully through the kitchen window, scanning the tree line. "I see at least 3 positions, maybe more." Another text arrived. 60 seconds, Sarah. Then I start taking pieces off him." Her hands trembled as she stared at the screen. This was what she'd feared most, that her past would destroy someone innocent, someone good. Jake had given her shelter, protection, maybe even love, and now he was going to die because of her. Unless she stopped it. "I'm going out there," she called to Jake. "Like hell you are." His voice was sharp with command. This isn't your fight anymore. But it was. It had always been her fight. Sarah thought about the baby growing inside her, about the future she'd dared to imagine just yesterday. A life free from fear, free from Marcus's control. Jake had shown her that such a life was possible, had made her believe she deserved happiness. Now she had 30 seconds to choose between that future and Jake's life. The choice was easier than breathing. She stood up, ignoring Jake's shouts of protest, and walked toward the front door. Glass crunched under her bare feet, but she barely felt it. Through the shattered window, she could see Marcus emerging from the woods, his familiar smile cold as winter. "That's my girl," he called out, close enough now that she could see the scar on his jaw from where she'd hit him with the lamp. "Always knew you'd make the smart choice." Jake appeared at the corner of the barn, his rifle trained on Marcus. "Don't take another step." Marcus laughed, the sound carrying easily across the snow. "You really think you can outdraw 3 rifles, farm boy? My men have you covered from the trees." "Maybe," Jake said calmly. "But I only need to drop you. Then Sarah dies too. You willing to make that trade?" Sarah stepped onto the porch, her bare feet finding the cold wood. "Nobody else needs to die. This is between us, Marcus." Finally showing some sense. Marcus took another step forward, and Sarah could see he was wearing tactical gear, bulletproof vest, combat boots, radio headset. This wasn't the Marcus who used to hit her in drunken rages. This was someone far more dangerous. "Let him go," she continued, "and I'll come with you." "Sarah, no." Jake's voice was rough with desperation. "Get back inside." But Marcus was nodding, his pale eyes never leaving her face. "See? She knows where she belongs. Always did, once you explained it properly." The casual cruelty in his tone made her flinch, but she forced herself to take another step forward. Behind Marcus, she could see movement in the trees, at least 4 men with rifles, all trained on Jake. "I'm coming," she said. Then everything went wrong at once. The gunshot echoed across the frozen landscape like a death knell, and Sarah's scream caught in her throat as Jake crumpled to his knees in the snow. Blood bloomed dark against his jacket, spreading like spilled wine on white linen. "No!" She lunged forward, but Marcus's iron grip on her wrist yanked her back against his chest. "Stay where you are, sweetheart," Marcus whispered against her ear, his breath hot and fetid. "Unless you want to watch me put another bullet in him." Jake pressed his hand against his shoulder, crimson seeping between his fingers. His eyes found hers across the 20 feet that separated them, and she saw something there that made her breath catch, not pain but determination, a silent message that sent ice through her veins. "You always were too stubborn for your own good, farm boy," Marcus called out, his voice carrying easily in the still air. The Glock remained trained on Jake with unwavering precision. "Should have minded your own business." "Let her go," Jake said through gritted teeth, struggling to his feet. "This is between you and me now." Marcus laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "Oh, this was never between us. This is about property, about what belongs to me." His grip on Sarah tightened until she gasped. "Sarah learned that lesson once before, didn't you, baby?" The memories crashed over her like a tide. Marcus's fists, his rage, the way he'd destroyed everything she'd ever loved until she had nothing left but fear. But something had changed in these past weeks. Jake had changed her, shown her what it meant to be protected instead of possessed. "I'm not yours anymore," she said, surprised by the strength in her own voice. The barrel of his gun swung toward her temple, cold metal against her skin. "We'll see about that." Jake took a step forward, leaving a trail of blood in the snow. "Touch her, and I'll kill you." "With what?" "You're bleeding out in my front yard." Marcus's finger moved to the trigger. "But don't worry, I'll take real good care of our baby. Raise him right." The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. The thought of Marcus anywhere near her child, of raising him with the same violence and cruelty that had nearly destroyed her, ignited something primal and fierce in her chest. "Over my dead body," she snarled, and drove her elbow back into Marcus's ribs with every ounce of strength she possessed. He doubled over with a grunt of pain, his grip loosening just enough for her to twist away. The gun went off again, the bullet going wide, and suddenly Jake was moving, not away from the danger but straight toward it. Despite his wound, Jake covered the distance between them with surprising speed. Years of farm work had built strength into his frame that blood loss couldn't immediately steal. He tackled Marcus around the waist, sending them both crashing into the snow in a tangle of limbs and curses. Sarah scrambled backward, her hand instinctively protecting her belly as the 2 men fought. Marcus was larger, but Jake fought with the desperate fury of a man protecting everything he loved. They rolled across the ground, grappling for control of the weapon. Another shot rang out, and for a terrifying moment, both men went still. "Jake!" Sarah's voice cracked with terror. Then Marcus shoved Jake away with a roar of pain, clutching his leg where the bullet had torn through his thigh. The gun lay in the snow between them, dark metal against pristine white. Both men dove for it simultaneously, but Jake's fingers closed around the grip first. He rolled away and came up on one knee, the Glock now pointed at Marcus's chest. "Don't move," Jake commanded, his voice steady despite the blood still flowing from his shoulder. Marcus raised his hand slowly, but his eyes held no defeat, only calculation. "You won't do it, farm boy. You're not a killer." "You're right," Jake said quietly, "but I'm not the one you need to worry about." Sarah had picked up the rifle from where it had fallen earlier, and now it was aimed directly at Marcus's head. Her hands were steady, her stance firm. The woman who had arrived at this ranch, broken and terrified, was gone, replaced by someone Marcus had never seen before, someone who would not bend, would not break, would not run. "Sarah," Marcus said carefully, "put the gun down. Think about what you're doing." "I am thinking," she replied, her voice calm as winter air. "I'm thinking about every bruise, every threat. Every night I lay awake afraid you'd kill me in my sleep. I'm thinking about my baby and the life I want to give him, and I'm thinking that world would be a whole lot safer without you in it." For the first time since he'd arrived, Marcus looked genuinely afraid. In the distance, the sound of sirens began to wail. The sound of splintering wood jolted Elena from restless sleep. She sat up in bed, heart hammering, as another crash echoed through the house. Beside her, Marcus was already moving, pulling on his jeans with swift, practiced motions. "Stay here," he whispered, reaching for the shotgun he kept beside the bed. "No." Elena swung her legs over the side, ignoring the protest from her swollen belly. "If it's him, it's him." Marcus's voice was granite. Through the bedroom window, headlights cut harsh lines through the pre-dawn darkness, and the rumble of multiple vehicles filled the air. He brought friends. Another crash, closer this time, the front door. Marcus grabbed Elena's hand, pulling her toward the back of the house. "The root cellar. You know where it is. I'm not hiding while you're protecting our baby." His eyes blazed with fierce determination. "That's the job that matters now." The sound of boots on hardwood floors made them both freeze. Deep voices, at least 3 of them, moving through the house with predatory confidence. "Check upstairs," came a voice Elena recognized with bone-deep terror. "Vincent, they can't have gone far." Marcus pressed the shotgun into her hands. "You remember what I taught you?" She nodded, fingers finding the safety with muscle memory from their practice sessions behind the barn. "Root cellar," he repeated. "Wait for my signal. 3 shots means it's over. 2 shots means run for the neighbors and don't look back." "Marcus," he silenced her with a kiss, hard and desperate. "I love you. Both of you." Then he was gone, melting into the shadows of the hallway with a stealth that reminded her there were still depths to this man she didn't know. Elena crept toward the kitchen, every floorboard seeming to scream under her weight. Through the doorway she could see the back door hanging open, cold air streaming in along with snow. The root cellar was 30 yards across open ground, 30 yards where she'd be completely exposed if anyone happened to look out the windows. "She's not upstairs," called a voice from above. "Then they're hiding somewhere close," Vincent replied. "Torch the barn, smoke them out." Elena's blood turned to ice. The barn housed not just farm equipment, but Marcus's generator, his winter feed stores, everything he needed to survive out here. Vincent wasn't just hunting them, he was destroying their life piece by piece. She made it to the back door when the first gunshot rang out, then another. Shouting erupted from somewhere deep in the house, followed by the crash of furniture overturning. Elena ran. The snow was deeper than she'd expected, coming up past her ankles and soaking through her boots within steps. Her breath came in ragged puffs as she struggled across the yard, the shotgun clutched against her chest. Behind her, orange light began to flicker against the windows. They'd made good on their threat about the barn. She was 10 yards from the root cellar when a figure stepped out from behind the woodshed. Well, well, the man was tall and lean, with the kind of predatory smile that made Elena's skin crawl. "Vincent said you'd gotten fat, but damn." Elena raised the shotgun, surprised by how steady her hands were. "Stay back." "Easy there, Mama Bear." The man raised his hands in mock surrender, still grinning. "Vincent just wants to talk. You know, about his kid. It's not his child. That's not what your medical records say. Amazing what money can buy you access to these days." More gunshots from the house, followed by a cry of pain that made Elena's heart stop. "Marcus, sounds like your boyfriend's having some trouble," the man continued, taking a step closer. "Vincent's got 3 guys with him, all military trained. Your farmer boy might be tough, but he's outnumbered." I said stay back. Elena's finger found the trigger. "Or what? You'll shoot me?" Another step. "Sweet thing like you. I don't think you have it in—" The shotgun blast was deafening. The man dropped like a stone, clutching his shoulder and screaming curses that turned the snow around him red. Elena didn't wait to see how badly he was hurt. She stumbled the last few yards to the root cellar and wrenched open the heavy wooden door, disappearing into the earthy darkness, just as more shouts erupted from the direction of the house. The cellar smelled of potatoes and preservation, a comforting scent that did nothing to calm her racing pulse. Above her head, she could hear running footsteps and more voices, Vincent's men spreading out to search the property. She clutched the shotgun and waited, counting seconds that felt like hours. One shot down, she thought grimly. Whatever happened next, at least she'd proven she could fight back. The baby kicked hard against her ribs, as if responding to the chaos above. Elena placed her free hand over her belly. "Just a little longer," she whispered. "Daddy's coming for us." She had to believe that was true. The silence that followed Marcus's confession hung heavy between them, broken only by the whisper of wind through the cabin walls. Elena's hand remained pressed against her belly, feeling the baby's restless movements as if sensing the tension in the room. "Tell me," she said quietly, her voice steady despite the tremor in her chest. Marcus turned away from her, his broad shoulders rigid. "You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that we're both running from something. I understand that in 3 days, everything we've built here might be destroyed." She stepped closer, close enough to see the muscle working in his jaw. "I need to know who you really are." He was quiet for so long she thought he might refuse. Then, slowly, he began to speak. "My name isn't Marcus Cole. It's Marcus Reeves." The words came out rough, like they'd been buried too long. 5 years ago, I was a cop in Denver, undercover narcotics. Elena's breath caught, but she remained silent. There was an operation. A big one. We'd been tracking a distribution network for months, and I was deep inside, too deep. His hand unconsciously moved to the scar along his jaw. The department wanted to pull me out, but I convinced them to let me stay, said I could bring down the whole organization. What happened? I fell in love with the wrong woman. The admission came out bitter. Sarah Martinez. She was the sister of one of the dealers, but she seemed different, clean. I thought she was just caught up in her family's mess, trying to get out. Elena watched the pain play across his features, understanding dawning. She was working with them. Everything between us was a setup. When I finally realized it, when I tried to salvage the operation, he stopped, his hands clenching into fists. There was a warehouse, supposed to be a major bust. Instead, I walked into a trap. The room felt smaller somehow, the weight of his words pressing down on them both. 3 good cops died that night because I trusted the wrong person, because I let my feelings compromise everything. He finally turned to face her, and the anguish in his eyes made her chest ache. Sarah and her people, they thought they'd killed me too, left me for dead in that burning warehouse. But you survived. Barely. Spent 2 months in the hospital. When I got out, internal affairs wanted answers I couldn't give without admitting how badly I'd compromised the operation. The families of the dead officers, he shook his head. I couldn't face them, couldn't face what I'd done. Elena reached for him, but he stepped back. So I disappeared, used contacts to create a new identity, found this place, and tried to forget. His laugh was hollow. But you can't outrun guilt, Elena. It follows you everywhere. That's why you don't trust easily. That's why I shouldn't trust at all. His eyes met hers, intense and pained. But somehow you made me forget that lesson. The baby kicked hard against Elena's ribs, and she winced, placing both hands on her belly. Marcus was beside her instantly, his confession momentarily forgotten. "Are you all right? She's restless tonight. Probably picking up on my stress." Elena managed a weak smile. "She doesn't like it when I'm upset." Marcus's hand hovered near her belly, not quite touching. "May I?" She nodded, guiding his palm to where the baby was most active. Almost immediately the movements gentled, as if the child recognized his touch. "She knows you," Elena whispered. Something shifted in Marcus's expression, the hard edges softening. "I never thought, after everything I've done, I never thought I deserved this kind of peace. You can't live in the past forever, Marcus. Trust me, I know." She covered his hand with hers. What happened to those officers? That wasn't your fault. You couldn't have known. I should have known. It was my job to know. Your job was to stop criminals. You did that job, even when it cost you everything. She stepped closer, eliminating the distance between them. You're not the same man who made those mistakes. The man I know, the man who saved me, who's protected us. He's worth loving. Marcus closed his eyes, leaning his forehead against hers. Elena! I know who you are now, all of it, and I'm not going anywhere. For a moment, they stood like that, connected by touch and shared secrets, the baby quiet between them. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows and reminding them both that their sanctuary was temporary. When Ryan comes, Marcus said finally, he won't just be dealing with a farmer anymore. Elena heard the promise in his voice, the steel beneath the vulnerability. Will you be ready? His arms came around her, strong and sure. For you? For her? I'll be whatever I need to be. But even as she melted into his embrace, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that Ryan's arrival would test more than just Marcus's resolve. Some ghosts, once awakened, demanded more than just courage to put them back to rest. The gunshot echoed across the frozen valley like thunder, and for a heartbeat, the world stopped. Elena watched in horror as Marcus stumbled backward, his hand pressed to his shoulder where crimson bloomed across his shirt. The rifle he'd been holding clattered to the porch boards. No! The scream tore from her throat as she lurched toward him, but Jake's iron grip held her back. Stay down, Jake commanded, his voice deadly calm as he kept his own rifle trained on the tree line where the shot had come from. His eyes never left the shadows between the pines. Marcus, how bad? I'll live, Marcus grunted through gritted teeth, sliding down against the cabin wall. Came from the ridge. Bastards got a good vantage point. Elena's hands shook as she pressed them against her belly, feeling the baby's restless movement. This was her fault, all of it. She should have kept running, should never have brought this nightmare to their doorstep. There's something you need to know, she said suddenly, the words tumbling out. About why Derek wants me back so badly. Jake's jaw tightened, but his aim never wavered. Now's not exactly the time for confessions, Elena. Yes, it is. She crawled toward Marcus, grabbing the medical kit they'd stashed on the porch. Because if something happens to me, you need to understand what you're really fighting for. Another shot rang out, splintering the wood near Jake's head. He ducked and fired back, the muzzle flash lighting up his grim features. Talk fast, then. Elena's hands moved automatically, applying pressure to Marcus's wound, despite her trembling. Derek isn't just violent, he's dirty, FBI dirty. He's been selling information to drug cartels for years, taking money to look the other way on raids. Marcus hissed as she tightened the makeshift bandage. And you know this how? Because I helped him. The admission felt like swallowing glass. I thought I was just doing clerical work, filing reports, organizing schedules, but I started noticing patterns, raids that came up empty because someone had tipped off the targets, evidence that went missing. I confronted him about it. Jake's voice was ice. That's when he started hitting you. That's when I realized I was carrying the child of a monster. Elena's voice broke. And that's when I started gathering evidence. I have copies of everything, bank records, communication logs, names of his contacts. It's all hidden in a safety deposit box in Denver. A third shot shattered the front window, sending glass cascading across the porch. Jake swore and moved to a different position, using the cabin's corner for cover. So you're not just a victim, Marcus said, understanding dawning in his eyes despite the pain. You're a witness, a federal witness, worth millions to the right people if she disappears permanently, Jake added grimly. No wonder he won't let this go. Elena nodded, tears streaming down her face. I thought if I could just disappear, start over somewhere no one would find me, maybe my baby could have a normal life. But Derek will never stop, not as long as I'm alive to testify. The sound of boots crunching through snow came from multiple directions now. Derek had brought help. Well then, Jake said, his voice carrying a note of dark satisfaction. I guess we'll just have to make sure he doesn't leave this mountain. Jake, no! Elena grabbed his arm. There are too many of them. We should run. There's still time to get to the truck. He looked down at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her breath catch. Not just determination, but love. Pure, fierce, protective love that would burn down the world before letting harm come to her. I told you before, Elena, I don't run, not from anything, and especially not from someone threatening my family. My family. The words hit her like a physical blow. He meant it. All of it. Contact! Marcus shouted suddenly. Movement on the left flank! Jake spun and fired twice in quick succession. A cry of pain echoed from the forest, followed by cursing in Derek's familiar voice. That's one down, Jake said with grim satisfaction. He looked back at Elena, his expression softening for just a moment. Whatever happens next, I need you to know something. These past weeks with you, they've been the best of my life. You and that baby, you gave me something I thought I'd lost forever. Jake, I love you, Elena. Both of you. And I'll be damned if I let that son of a bitch take away the only good thing I've ever had. Before she could respond, Derek's voice rang out across the clearing, amplified and distorted by the wind. Enough games, Elena. Come out now and maybe your boyfriends live through this. You've got 30 seconds to decide. The gunshot echoed through the valley like thunder, and for a heartbeat, everything went silent. Sarah watched Marcus stumble backward, his hand flying to his shoulder as dark blood seeped between his fingers. The rifle clattered from his grip onto the snow-covered porch. You always were a terrible shot, Marcus. Jake's voice carried across the clearing, steady despite the smoking barrel in his hands. He stepped out from behind the barn, moving with the calculated precision of someone who'd done this before. Marcus's face twisted with rage and pain. This isn't over, McKenna. You think one bullet stops me? No, Jake said, advancing slowly, the rifle trained on Marcus's chest. But the next one will. Sarah struggled to her feet, one hand pressed against her swollen belly where the baby had been kicking frantically throughout the confrontation. The child seemed to sense the danger, had been restless all morning as if warning her that this day would come. Sarah, get inside, Jake commanded without taking his eyes off Marcus. Call Sheriff Morrison. But Marcus laughed, a harsh sound that made her skin crawl. You really think the law matters out here? I've been planning this for months. That storm that brought her to you? I was 3 hours behind her, been watching, waiting for the right moment. The revelation hit Sarah like a physical blow. All this time she'd thought she was safe, that the storm had been a blessing in disguise. Instead, Marcus had been circling like a predator, biding his time. The hands you hired, she whispered, pieces falling into place. Rodriguez and Patterson. Marcus's grin was feral. Expensive, but worth every penny. Amazing what desperate men will do for the right price. They've been feeding me information for weeks. Your daily routines, McKenna's weaknesses, the layout of this place. Jake's jaw tightened, but his aim never wavered. Where are they now? Close enough. Marcus pressed harder against his wounded shoulder, his face pale but his eyes still burning with obsession. You can't protect her forever, McKenna. I know about your father, about what you did in Afghanistan. Sarah deserves to know what kind of monster she's been sleeping with. Sarah saw Jake's hands tremble almost imperceptibly. Whatever Marcus was referring to, it cut deep, but she'd seen enough of Jake's true nature over these past months to know that whatever darkness lived in his past, the man standing between her and danger now was good. My past doesn't change anything, Jake said quietly. Doesn't it? Marcus took a step forward despite the rifle pointed at him. Tell her about the civilians, Jake. Tell her about the convoy that never made it home because of your orders. The pain that flashed across Jake's face was unmistakable, but Sarah stepped forward. I don't care. Both men turned to look at her, and she felt the baby shift inside her, as if responding to her resolve. Whatever you did before, Jake, whatever mistakes you made, they don't change who you are now. They don't change how you've protected me, how you've loved me. She looked directly at Marcus, her fear transforming into something harder. and they don't give you the right to destroy the life I'm trying to build." Marcus's expression darkened. "That baby should have been mine." "The baby is mine," Sarah said firmly. "Only mine. You lost any claim to either of us the first time you hit me." The sound of engines rumbled in the distance, growing closer. Marcus heard it too, his head snapping toward the access road. But instead of the law enforcement vehicles Sarah hoped for, she saw the dust cloud that meant trucks, multiple vehicles approaching fast. "Backup plan," Marcus said, his confidence returning despite the blood still seeping through his fingers. "You really think I'd come alone to finish this?" Jake moved closer to Sarah, positioning himself between her and both Marcus and the approaching vehicles. "The root cellar," he murmured. "Remember where I showed you? Get there, bar the door from inside, and don't come out until you hear my voice and mine alone. I'm not leaving you." "You're not leaving me. You're protecting our family." His voice softened for just a moment. "That's our baby, Sarah. Ours. And I'll be damned if I let him take either of you." The trucks were close enough now that she could see there were 3 of them, filled with men she didn't recognize. The isolation that had once felt like sanctuary now felt like a trap. Marcus straightened despite his wound, emboldened by his reinforcements. "Last chance, McKenna. Walk away, and maybe you live through this." Jake pumped the rifle, chambering another round. "Counteroffer. You leave now, and I don't put the next bullet somewhere less forgiving." The first truck crested the hill, and Sarah knew their time for talk had run out. Whatever came next would be decided with violence, and she finally understood that some fights couldn't be avoided, only survived. She pressed a hand to her belly and ran for the cellar. The silence after the gunshots stretched like a taut wire, broken only by Sarah's ragged breathing and the soft hiss of falling snow against the cabin windows. Marcus lay motionless beside the overturned table, crimson spreading slowly across the wooden floor beneath him. Sarah pressed her back against the wall, the smoking rifle trembling in her hands. Her eyes darted between Marcus's still form and the shattered door where Jack stood frozen, his own weapon half raised, face etched with disbelief. "Is he—" Jack's voice cracked. "I don't know." Sarah's whisper barely carried across the room. The baby moved restlessly inside her, responding to her thundering heartbeat. She couldn't bring herself to look away from Marcus, searching desperately for any sign of movement, any indication that her shot had found its mark in time. A low groan escaped Marcus's lips, and Sarah's heart lurched. His fingers twitched against the floor, then slowly curled into a fist. Blood seeped from his shoulder where her bullet had torn through muscle and sinew, but his chest rose and fell with steady breaths. "You always were a terrible shot," Marcus wheezed, pushing himself up on his good arm. His face was pale, but his eyes burned with familiar rage, just like everything else you tried to do. Relief and terror warred in Sarah's chest. He was alive, but wounded like a cornered animal, he was more dangerous than ever. Jack stepped carefully through the doorway, glass crunching under his boots, keeping his rifle trained on Marcus. "Stay down," Jack commanded, his voice steady despite the chaos around them. "It's over." Marcus laughed, a bitter sound that sent ice through Sarah's veins. "You think this ends here? You have no idea what you've gotten yourself into, farm boy." He struggled to his feet, swaying slightly, his injured arm hanging useless at his side. "Sarah belongs to me. She's carrying my child." "No." The word tore from Sarah's throat with such force that both men looked at her. She straightened against the wall, finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "I don't belong to anyone. And this baby—" She placed her free hand protectively over her swollen belly. "This baby will never know your violence." Marcus's face twisted with fury. "That child is mine by right, just like you are." "Rights?" Sarah's voice gained power with each word. "What right did you have to hit me, to threaten me, to make me so afraid that I'd rather run into a blizzard than stay one more night under the same roof?" For months she had carried his voice in her head, telling her she was worthless, that she needed him, that she would never survive without him. But standing here now, with Jack beside her and her own courage finally awakened, those words crumbled to dust. Marcus took a lurching step toward her, and Jack immediately moved between them. "That's far enough. You think you can protect her?" Marcus snarled. "I know people, connections you can't imagine. This isn't over." "Yes, it is." Jack's voice carried a finality that made even Marcus pause. "Because when the sheriff gets here, there's going to be quite a story to tell. Breaking and entering, assault, threatening a pregnant woman. And that's just what happened tonight." Marcus's eyes narrowed. "You think anyone will believe?" "They'll believe the evidence," Sarah interrupted, her voice growing stronger. "The bruises you left on my ribs, the medical records from when you broke my wrist, the neighbors who heard you screaming at me through the walls." She had been silent for so long, protecting his reputation while sacrificing her own safety. No more. The sound of vehicles approaching through the storm reached them through the broken door. Jack had managed to get a call through on his radio before Marcus arrived. Help was finally coming. Marcus heard it too. His face shifted through a range of emotions: rage, calculation, and finally something that might have been fear. For the first time since she'd known him, Sarah saw Marcus recognize that his control was slipping away. "This isn't over," he said again, but the words lacked their earlier venom. He was backing toward the rear of the cabin, looking for another way out. "Yes, it is," Sarah repeated firmly. "It's been over since the night I decided I deserved better." Red and blue lights flickered through the windows as the sheriff's vehicles pulled up outside. Jack kept his weapon steady, but Sarah could see the relief in his shoulders as heavy footsteps approached the door. "Sarah?" Sheriff Morrison's voice called through the storm. "Jack? Everyone all right in there?" "We're here," Jack called back, his eyes never leaving Marcus. "Suspect is wounded but mobile. Send the paramedics." As uniformed officers filed through the damaged doorway, Sarah finally allowed herself to lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking violently now, the adrenaline beginning to ebb, but something fundamental had shifted inside her. She had faced her greatest fear and survived. More than that, she had fought back. The morning sun cast long shadows across the snow-covered meadow as Sarah stepped onto the porch, her hand resting protectively on her rounded belly. 3 weeks had passed since Marcus's death. 3 weeks since the nightmare had finally ended. The bruises had faded, the cuts had healed, but the peace she felt now ran deeper than her skin. Jake emerged from the barn, his breath visible in the crisp air. The scar along his jaw caught the light as he smiled at her, a real smile, one that reached his eyes. He'd been different since that night, as if killing Marcus had lifted some invisible weight from his shoulders. Not because he'd taken a life, but because he'd saved one. Saved two, actually. "How's little one this morning?" he asked, climbing the porch steps to wrap his arms around her from behind. "Active," Sarah laughed, leaning back against his chest. "I think he knows his daddy's voice." Jake's hands settled over hers on her belly, and she felt the baby respond with a gentle kick. They'd decided not to find out the gender, but Jake insisted it was a boy. Sarah suspected he was right. The baby seemed to have inherited her stubborn streak already. "Sheriff called," Jake said softly. "The investigation's officially closed." Marcus's associates scattered after word got out about his death. Without him holding the organization together, they've got bigger problems than one missing woman. Sarah nodded, feeling another piece of her past finally settle into place. The fear that had driven her for so long was truly gone now. She was free, they were free. "I've been thinking," she said, turning in his arms, "about names." Jake raised an eyebrow. "Oh? If it's a boy, what about David? After your brother?" Jake's expression went very still. She'd learned about David gradually, piece by piece, during their long winter conversations. The brother who died in Afghanistan. The guilt Jake carried, the reason he'd retreated to this isolated ranch. Sarah. His voice was rough with emotion. He would have liked that, wouldn't he? Having a nephew to carry on his memory. Jake cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing across her cheekbones. "He would have loved you," he whispered. "Both of you." She reached up to trace the scar on his jaw, the one he'd gotten the night he saved her life. "And if it's a girl?" "Hope," he said without hesitation. Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Hope? Because that's what you gave me, what you both gave me. Hope for something better." Inside the house, the phone rang. Jake groaned, reluctant to let her go, but Sarah pushed him gently toward the door. "Answer it. I'll be right in." She remained on the porch for a moment longer, watching the sun climb higher over the mountains. This land that had once felt like a hiding place now felt like home. They'd talked about expanding the ranch, maybe getting some horses. Jake wanted to teach their child to ride. Sarah wanted to plant a garden come spring. "Sarah!" Jake's voice carried a note of excitement. She found him in the kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, grinning broadly. He held up one finger, mouthing "my lawyer." Sarah's heart skipped. They'd been waiting for news about Jake's legal situation, the investigation into Marcus's death, and Jake's justified use of force. Though the sheriff had been reassuring, they'd both worried about potential federal involvement. "Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you so much." Jake hung up and swept Sarah into his arms, spinning her around despite her protests about the baby. "All clear," he said, setting her down carefully. "No charges, no federal investigation, self-defense, protection of others, case closed." Sarah felt the last knot of tension in her chest finally unravel. "Really? Really?" Jake's hands framed her face again. "We're free, Sarah. Completely free to build whatever life we want." She thought about the woman who'd stumbled onto this ranch 5 months ago, terrified, pregnant, alone. That woman felt like a stranger now. This Sarah was strong, loved, protected. This Sarah had found her place in the world. "Marry me," Jake said suddenly. Sarah blinked. "What?" "Marry me. I know we've talked about it, but I'm asking officially now. No more running, no more hiding, no more waiting for the other shoe to drop. Marry me, Sarah. Let me be your husband and this baby's father in every way that matters." Sarah's answer came without hesitation. Yes. Jake's kiss was gentle, reverent, full of promise. When they broke apart, Sarah could see their entire future stretching ahead. Birthdays and holidays, scraped knees and bedtime stories, quiet mornings and passionate nights. The baby kicked again, as if celebrating with them. "I love you," she whispered against Jake's lips. "I love you too, both of you. Forever." Outside, snow began to fall again, but inside their home, surrounded by warmth and love and hope, Sarah had never felt safer.